it says in this last week's parsha. What does it say? Pachtechem umorachem. What's the difference according to the Medrash? Anybody know? Let me read this. Okay, you guys study Ramban. By the way, we're going to mention a lot of Ramban today. Who's learning? Who reads Ramban? Remember Rabbi Parnas said about Ramban? What was this week's? Okay, this week's parsha. It says here, Lo yitzasev ish b'fnechem, pachtechem u'mora'achem yitin Adonai lechem, al pnei chloretz asher tidruchuva, kasher diber lechem. Your pachad and your mora. What's it doing with pachad and mora? Pachad is the shoresh pei chet dalid. Mora is the shoresh yud resh aleph. Right? So
more like fear and mora is more like on sort of kibbutz.
So according to the Sifrei, I think it's immediate. The difference between clear and present and far off. It says that they'll give the fear, the pachad, to those who are nearby, and the mora on those who are farther away. You'll be able to fight those who are there, and you have to know that this will also increase the fear of those who are farther away. Here's the problem. If you apply your pachad on your local adjacent anti-Semites properly, you know what's going to happen? The ones who are far away are going to, they're going to fear you also. Not like in the sense that, yes, Europeans should think that Israel is coming to be aggressive, which is not, it never will be. However, it used to be when the Jewish people stood up for themselves and fought and won and gave it to their adjacent aggressors, what happened to the people in foreign lands? They respected us, a grudging respect. The only way you could get Esav and Ishmael's respect in other countries is by what? By speaking their language. Not hitting, if you want America's respect, you don't hit America hard. You hit your enemies hard. That's what the end of Parshas Ekev is talking about. There's a Ramban. We'll close with a little part talking about Ramban. Rabbi Parnas says you have to learn Ramban on the Parsha. It's like learning Gemara. When you learn Gemara, you learn Rashi, right? And then you learn Tosfos. Because Tosfos gives you a different perspective on every page. Rashi said it like this, but here's how we understand it, right? You like learning Tosfos. Learn enough Tosfos yet? So Rabbi Parnas said, learning Ramban on the Torah after learning Rashi is like learning Tosfos. Okay? So on the Torah, there's also Rashi. But then where's the Tosfos? That's Ramban. Ramban has much longer essays and responds to many things that Rashi wrote in Ibn Ezra and even the Rambam himself. So you get a nice, good picture there. So Ramban, on last week's Parsha, points out something that I think is quite profound. I don't know how he saw this from Rashi, but we'll just say it a little bit outside. The first thing is Moshe Rabbeinu started his prayer to God by addressing God as Hashem Elohim, right? Now, if you read the book of Genesis, you find that in the first chapter describing the 6 days of creation, to how is God referred every time?
Elohim.
Yeah, Shem Elohim, Shem Elokut, throughout. And then the second chapter, after Shabbos is introduced, the whole Garden of Eden story, God is invariably referred to as Hashem Elohim, the Tetragrammaton, pronounced Shem Adnut, and then Elohim. And then the next parsha, which talks about the aftermath, okay, what did Adam and Eve do afterwards in Cain and Hevel, and etc. What word is used there? Just Shem Havaya. Okay, the 4-letter name pronounced Adnut. Interesting. So there's a lot to be said. Chazal say in the Sifrei to last week's parsha, the Shem, the 4-letter name, that's God's Midas Harachamim, and Elokut is Midas Hadin. And with the creation involving man, once we get to the story about what man actually did in the Garden of Eden, you need to have both Midas Harachamim and Midas Hadin for man to survive. Okay? You can't survive with just one or the other. Now, in Parshas Lech Lecha, suddenly we have a different phenomenon. What happens? God's name is actually written Aleph Daled Nun Yud. Now, we always pronounce the 4-letter name as Aleph Daled Nun Yud, but there it's actually written. And then it's followed in the text by the 4-letter name, Yud Hey Vav Hey. But how is that pronounced there? Because the first name is Aleph Daled Nun Yud and pronounced like that, the second name is pronounced Elohim. You've seen this?
I noticed.
That's how Abraham referred to God when he asked him, "How will I know I'm going to inherit the land?" Abraham entreated God for something, and God answered his prayer. Then we have at the beginning of Parshas Veschanon, Moshe Rabbeinu does the same thing. It says Hashem Elohim, but it's written Aleph Daled Nun Yud Yud Hey Vav Hey, and we pronounce it like that, which means that the 4-letter name has sort of a krieg seed property to it. When the word Aleph Lamed Hey Yud Mem is spelled, it's always pronounced that way. There's no Kriyan Ksiv, and that always means Midas Hadin. And apparently, when the name Aleph Daled Nun Yud is spelled, it's sort of lacking maybe Hadinut, Adon Akol, all powerful. But the four-letter name of God is the ultimate Kriyan Ksiv. Why is it the ultimate Kriyan Ksiv? Because we, at least La Halacha, when we're learning, we never read it the way it is written, right? We always read it as either Shem Adnut or Shem Elokim. Most of the time we read it as Shem Adnut. But it has this capacity that most of the time it is Midas Harachamim. It's spelled Midas Harachamim, it's pronounced with Midas Harachamim. But sometimes it's spelled Midas Harachamim, but it's pronounced with Midas Hadin. And that's what you have here in front of us. Rashi surprisingly says, at the beginning of the Parshas Bezchanon, he says, Rachum Badin. The fact that Moshe Rabbeinu referred to God as Aleph Dal Nun Yud, Yud Hey Vav Hey, and the second of those is pronounced Elokim, means that God is Rachum Badin. That's what Rashi says there. My question is, why didn't Rashi mention this when Avraham Avinu used the same term? Why didn't Rashi mention it there? I don't know. But there Rashi says it. And Ramban says that he disagrees with the way Rashi somehow diukes it. I don't know how Rashi made the diuk, but apparently it's Rachum Badin. Okay? And Ramban seems to say that the Rachum is the Iker. Okay? Whereas, no, the fact that the first name is spelled as an honorific, okay, it's basically my Lord, right, with a capital L. So really, the diuk should be in the fact that the name is spelled. The second name is Midas Hadin and Midas Harachamim combined. And he says it interprets it slightly different than Rashi. See over there. But it's quite interesting. Das Mikra also brings this. But Ramban is trying to hint at something there. And a lot of times he doesn't tell you exactly what he is hinting at. But there is this profound idea that depending how we spell God's name and how we pronounce it, what are we appealing? And he could actually hear it. My question is, when you have kavanah, how hard is the Baal Kriya trying to say this? When he says Shem Hashem, he reads it. It's spelled Yud Vav Hey, but he pronounces it as though it's written Aleph Dal Nun Yud. He has to have this kavanah differently than when he actually reads the name Aleph Dal Nun Yud. And so too, when he reads the divine name, the four-letter name, as though it pronounced Elokim, he should have this in mind, that there's two meanings encoded in that very word. Okay? Very important. If you just see Elokim, that's just Midas Hadin. Okay. Ramban also says that whereas Moshe Rabbeinu described what happened when he went up to Mount Sinai, how many times was Moshe on Mount Sinai for 40 days? Anybody know?
Twice.
Just twice? What does Rashi say? Come on, someone give another answer. What's the correct answer? Anybody know? So the chronology is that it happens to be that if you, let's say, take our calendar, you find that there's about 40 days from Shavuos until Shavasar B'Tammuz, right? The first 40 days. And then between Shavasar B'Tammuz and Rosh Chodesh Elul, there's 3 weeks and 3 weeks, right? Shavasar B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av is 22 days total. Okay, three weeks in between. No, from Shavasar B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av is 3 weeks. That's what they call it, 3 weeks. But really, it's 22 days. What?
It's because of the Parsha. He talks about his first time around.
Yeah, he says Hayamim Rishonim. Yeah, so read Rashi here and in Kisi. So you see that Rashi takes an approach like many others, and that is, hold on 1 second. So you have 3 weeks, and then between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Chodesh Elul, how many days do you have? About 3 weeks. So you have the summer is 40 days, 3 weeks, 3 weeks, 40 days. And by the way, 3 weeks comes out to how much? 6 weeks. How many days are in 6 weeks? 42 days. You basically have 41, 41, 40 until you get to Yom Kippur. That's how it breaks up. So Rashi is very, very clear. He says this in a few places. Moshe Rabbeinu spent the first 40 days getting the Torah, the next 40 days trying to pray and save Am Yisrael. And the 40 days after that was a redo, learning the Torah from scratch. Now, it says, last week's Parsha, that Moshe Rabbeinu came down from the mountain, V'hahar bo'er ba'esh. Something not mentioned in Parshas Kisi. So when Moshe Rabbeinu first came down with the luchos and smashed it, it doesn't tell us that the mountain was still burning on fire. Hahar bo'er ba'esh. Why is that significant that Moshe Rabbeinu adds that detail? That the mountain was burning with fire. Because when they first went up to Mount Sinai, it was also a gigantic light show. Okay? Thunder and lightning, the sound of the shofar, the world was shaking, right? And that continued All 40 days he was on the mountain. That was awesome. The last time Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Mount Sinai, that's the last time because it's a machlokas actually, if he went up during those middle 40 days. The last 40 days that culminated in Yom Kippur, he also went up to the mountain. And it says it was the same rules as last time. Vigbalta tahar. You have to make a boundary. No one's allowed to go up the mountain. Just Moshe Rabbeinu. But there was one fundamental exception. Rav Shechter likes to say this one. The first time Moshe Rabbeinu went up, it was the biggest show on earth. The second time Moshe Rabbeinu went up, they were keeping all the same rules, but this time it was a normal, sunny, clear day. Nothing out of the ordinary. And it was like that the entire 40 days until Moshe Rabbeinu came down. No one would have known something miraculous was happening up there. It was quiet. You didn't see the cloud, right? By the way, says that's why the second luchos survived. The first luchos were given in the most non-modest way possible, not the most theistic, as we say in Yiddish. So they were destroyed. The second luchos were given in a very modest manner, so they survived. This is similar to the difference between the experiences people had in the first temple and the second temple. First temple, you went there, what would you have seen? You would have seen the cloud of glory. And you would have seen open miracles. You've seen fire come down from, the heaven and consume the korban in a blaze. The Kohanim could not enter the Kodesh because the cloud of glory filled it. It was just too powerful there. You would have seen Nevi'im walking around. You would have had a Kohen Gadol who can look down at his breastplate and get messages from God. Second temple was like nowadays. The temple is holy, same rules, same limitations about going into the temple. You know the holiness is there, but you don't see the divine fire. You don't see the cloud hovering over the temple. You could even have a case where who was it? First one was it was Mark Antony. No, who was it? It was who was the one who conquered Jerusalem? Pompey. Okay, Pompey was the one who invaded the temple in the negative first century, more than 100 years before the second temple was destroyed. He also invaded the Kodesh Kodashim and tried to defile it, right? And he went in there and he came out on, just a roof, okay? Nothing was stopping him from going in there. He didn't get zapped, right? If you had been at the second temple, you would have seen it, but that's what it was like. Let's get back to the point. These middle 40 days, Rashi says Moshe Rabbeinu was on Mount Sinai. So we have basically had a one-day break in between each time he was on Mount Sinai. Ramban points out that there's a little difficulties in the Psukim. He says Rashi's pshat is a little bit difficult because of, a few problems. See what the Ramban says there. It seems, for example, that it says Moshe Rabbeinu took his tent. This was his habit. While God was angry at the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu took his tent out of Machon Shilo, and where'd he go? Outside. It says he pitched his tent outside, and that's where people wanted to hear from God. They'd go outside the tent. So the pshat is, as brought by the Medrash Tanchuma and the Machlokas Tanaim. It's not even a Machlokas. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, who had a lot of Machlokas, and here they agree that Moshe Rabbeinu pitched his tent the entire time between the first 40 days and the second 40 days. That is from Shivasar B'Tammuz until Rosh Chodesh Elul. Moshe Rabbeinu was dwelling outside the tent. He only went up to Mount Sinai how many times? Twice. But then Ramban says, by like Rashi's pshat, it makes more sense because of other psukim indicating that Moshe Rabbeinu was actually up on the mount 3 times. And when it says he pitched his tent outside, when was that? That was after Yom Kippur and before the building of the Mishkan, about 6 months' time. Fine. That's what the Rambam brings there. So you don't have this in Chevel's edition of the Ramban. The Chevel edition, which most people have, is in English, printed by Shilo, right? The people used to print the Shilo sitters. So Chevel, who's Chaim Tov Chevel, or Charles Chevel in English, was, I think, French-born, and he was a rabbi in America. Eventually, in his later years, he made Aliyah. He worked at Mosad Rav Kook, and it's his Hebrew critical edition of the Ramban that features in the Torah Chaim on the far corner. You've seen it? It has footnotes. So even though the big Shilo English edition has comprehensive footnotes, the Hebrew footnotes are more complete. And in the Hebrew footnotes, for the Torah Chaim, he brings from the Brisker Rav, the Grizz, something very interesting about another machlokas, Rashi and Ramban there. Ramban has already introduced this idea that maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was actually in the camp the entire time from Shivasar B'Tammuz until Rosh Chodesh Elul, those 6 weeks, right? Rashi has it that Moshe Rabbeinu only had one day. On Shivasar B'Tammuz, Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Sinai and punished the perpetrators, punished those who had worshipped the golden calf and got other Levium to help him do it, right? So there's a question there in Chazal. in what legal mechanism were these people punished? Extrajudicially or judicially? Were they tried as idolaters, or were they tried as Irani Dachas types? Why would you have to say that they're Irani Dachas types, not idolaters, by the way? Because they're being killed by the sword. If you had real life idolaters who were convicted in, with due process, what do you have to do? You have to stone them. Yet you have it that they were killed by the sword. So it must be there's something else going on here. It must have been they were killed Badin Irani Dachas. Irani Dachas means where it's city. Once you have a majority of people in the group who are worshiping idols, they're all killed, and they're to be put to death by the sword. War. So that's what it seems that Moshe Rabbeinu did. Either way, that's still a judicial way of killing them. That's not extrajudicial. That's also a legal way. That's what Beis Din does. So Rashi has it that the killings took place the next day, on the 18th of Tammuz. Whereas Ramban says, no, it was all a Horat Shah, okay, a one-time dispensation. It was extrajudicial. It wasn't done using the normal legal means, whether trying them as idolaters, as individuals who deserve skila, or a whole Irani Dachas who deserve to be put to death by the sword, usually by decapitation, but in war, if you have to stab them, you stab them, unfortunately. So the Brisker Rav said, this actually shows something important. Why does Rambam have to say, Ramban put it all on one day, on Shavuos B'Tammuz, and Rashi divides it between 2 days. The killings actually took place on the 18th. What's the reason for this? And the answer is that when you have judicial killings, Beis Din has to deliberate and actually give a verdict. You also have this rule that they have halanat hadin. What's halanat hadin? Halanat hadin means that when you have someone who's convicted of a capital crime, you do not put him to death that very day. You have to give another day. Perhaps there are going to be appeals. More evidence will come to light. Don't kill him right away. And they're supposed to be fasting the next day when they actually execute the fellow. There's a 1-day reprieve, right? You heard about this din? It's a din in Beis Din. The king, by the way, has no such din. The king, sometimes when he has to, he can, kill many on one day even. The Beis Din is not supposed to have more than one, such a act happening on a given day. But if it's like the Ramban, and what Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to do is extrajudicial Horat Shah, then all the killings could take place on that very day, on the Shavuos B'Tammuz. Why? Because there's no din of halana. They don't have to wait a day to see perhaps there's going to be mitigating factors, more testimony, more evidence going to come to light. That's what the Brisker Rav pointed out on this. So we see Moshe Rabbeinu was faced with a terrible situation, and that was what? What's the paradox here? Moshe Rabbeinu says he had to go up to the mountain and pray, Nam Yisrael be saved. What was the problem? Tell me what I just said. Considering all this, that Moshe Rabbeinu was in charge of punishing so many people for worshiping idols.
He shouldn't be off the hook so easily.
Well, if he's punishing people who are guilty of worshiping idols, and he's basically telling them, you all worship idols, and I had to save you, I had to kill a lot of people, and Levim also had a hard time. This is a terrible tragedy. Yet at the same time, he has to be their defense attorney and pray 40 days to God. Basically, it says I didn't eat and drink. The first time Moshe Rabbeinu didn't eat and drink for 40 days, what was the situation? We don't even know why. Perhaps it was just he was like one of the angels. The second time around, perhaps the no eating and drinking was because why? Like it's alluded to in the verse. It was like a Yom Kippur. This is a crisis. He has to fast. He was fasting not because somehow he's being sustained like an angel, but now it's his life and the life of Am Yisrael hanging in the balance. So on the one hand, Moshe Rabbeinu has to be the executioner. He has to be the accuser and the executioner and set up Batei Din to try and punish all these people. But on the other hand, he also has to pray on their behalf. Somehow he has to find, while he's telling them that they were rebellious. Since the day I met you, you've been rebellious. Don't forget, you really upset God at Sinai. Moshe Rabbeinu is stuck. Understand the crisis. This is a paradox. Moshe Rabbeinu has to be the great, he has to intercede. What's the proper word now? I'm losing my English. Is it intercessor?
Yeah.
Interlocutor. Okay. Yet he also has to be the one who was executing everyone, like that, the execution of justice. So Moshe Rabbeinu basically had a trial. That by trial I mean like put on trial. I mean a trial of Avraham Avinu magnitude to figure out what to do. Yeah, that's a hard one. Moshe Rabbeinu had to find witnesses. He had to somehow argue that those who had duly been warned not to do what they did, and to whom there were witnesses to what they did, would be punished. But the rest were innocent. And it's kind of hard. Moshe Rabbeinu said, I also have to pray for Aaron because on one hand, Aaron was innocent. There was a lot that could be said about him. There was a lot that could not have been said about him. Said that God wanted to destroy Aaron, right? That's what Moshe Rabbeinu said. We had very large conflict here between those who had done wrong and those who had allowed things to go wrong. So let's conclude here. Rav Tzuri was saying basically that those who allowed this to happen, the hitnatkut at the time, and now the second hitnatkut, those who allowed it to happen, you're in a real tricky situation. You have to know, Rav Tzuri was saying, you can't claim as a soldier, I was just following orders. You're not an Eichmann. And even then, it didn't work for Eichmann. It's not going to work for you. You have to know you're going to be put to test. By the way, Anus Rahmana Patre. After the fact, God won't punish you. But you have to know your friends aren't going to forgive you. And it's a real heavy burden that if you chose to do the wrong thing in a conflict, even Aaron himself was on basically, he had the hangman's noose around his neck. So it's a very big problem. Okay? Moshe Rabbeinu was saying this. I think that if I had been there, Moshe Rabbeinu finally, after 40 years, is telling everybody this crisis, what happened. Yet it worked. And what's Moshe Rabbeinu's point? This is the whole point of Elul, by the way. Ramban says, what's the minhag? And Elul, we blow the shofar, right? Ramban has it that we blow the shofar on Rosh Chodesh Elul because that's when Moshe Rabbeinu went up the mount. And it seems, by the way, by their count, if it was 40 days, Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur is how many days? Rosh Chodesh Elul to Yom Kippur is? Well, my count is 39. It's actually 39. It must have been it was of Elul Mole that year. Only if Elul is full, a 30-day Elul, do you get to this point where, that Moshe Rabbeinu came down on day 40. Okay, Yom Kippur. By the way, Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to teach us that you could have a really complicated situation on your hands. When Elul comes around, you could actually be, maybe you are actually quite guilty of something, right? You have to pray. He was telling them, prayer is the way out of it. Actual, sincere teshuva. God doesn't lock the door ever, and He forgives also, but you have to really be sincere about it. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, "I saved everybody. I saved your lives. I saved Aaron's life. The only person who wasn't basically under threat of annihilation was whom? Well, no, Moshe Rabbeinu said God a few times. God said, I'll just destroy everybody. Harif mi many vash mi name. Okay, I'll start again with you. That would fulfill the promise to the forefathers. So Moshe Rabbeinu was the only one who wasn't in this situation. He's the one who taught us that's what Elul is all about. So we're in this situation now. We're approaching, when is Rosh Chodesh Elul? Oh, sorry. It's going to be a few weeks from now. I don't know, but not next week. We still have another week to go. We could talk about more Rosh Chodesh Elul, but I think that we have to really put ourselves in the proper frame of mind and realize that we have a lot to fix. If Rav Tzuriel had been here now, thank God he didn't get to see this most recent hitnatkut and what happened, because it would have just broken his heart. So and it should break our hearts, but we're not reacting right. We're too distant from God, and we don't know what it's like even to pray properly. We have no one to pray for us. Now the good thing is things on Temple Mount are improving, right? So people bowing down there, people are praying out loud. That's a good stage. They're pointing out there are Kabbalists and others, Rishonim, who wrote about this as the first stage. V'yishtachavu l'Hashem b'Har Kodesh. The Ovedim me'eretz Ashur, v'anidachim me'eretz Mitzrayim. Those who are exiled. The exiles are coming back from Ashur and Mitzrayim. So those were faraway lands. Those were also adjacent lands back in the day, right? Ashur, as we said, represents America. Mitzrayim represents what? What? No, well, today technically, yeah, it would represent, like, I guess it would represent Russia today and other places where people come from exile. No, when nowadays the equivalent of Mitzrayim, when he said this, when the Navi said it, Mitzrayim was the type of place where Jews run away to, and they're hoping somehow that it will be a refuge from the onslaught from Ashur, which is the Western world, America mostly. Okay, wherever it might be.
So in modernity, Ashur and Mitzrayim are both the same place.
What?
So in modernity, what the Navi referred to as Ashur and Mitzrayim are now the same place?
Yeah, maybe. No, it depends. There are different parts. It's an idea. They're conceptually, just like Gog and Magog. You don't have to worry when Yechezkel talked about Gog, who was the Nasi Meshech V'Tuval, coming from a place called Magog. So Chazal never assumed that it had to be a defined place in the map. Okay, it means someone could fit the bill. As a matter of fact, they say that Sancherib from Ashur could have fit the bill. He could have been the Gog from the Magog, right? Ashur would have been Magog. Gog is the king who comes from this place Magog. Even though Magog is mentioned other places, it's a fill-in. Okay, whoever fulfills the prophecy.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.